This movie begins in a small town in Mexico. Walter Poole is on his way to the local cantina. It has become his daily ritual. He came to Mexico to write a novel, but his typewriter has only gathered dust since he arrived. He enters the cantina and sits at his regular table. He brings him 4 beers and walks away. Walter begins guzzling down the beer. He belches with pleasure. Then he pours the beer on his chest to cool off. He drinks until he passes out. This has become his daily routine. The owner of the cantina wakes him up. Walter throws up on the floor. He tells the owner how hungry he is. He has no money, so he offers to work for the beer and food. The next day he is approached by Tony. Walter spits and asks, "What do you want?" Tony responds, "You're the first American I've seen, and I like to practice my English." Walter replies, "I'm not very chatty." Tony tells him he understands. Walter tells him to go away. "I'm what the Mexicans call a pendejo." Tony responds, "No man is a pendejo. If he has only one that he can call an amigo." Then he asked Walter if he's hungry. This gets Walter's attention because he's always hungry. Tony tells the waiter to bring food and beer. Walter is very pleased and hungry. He copes his food down while Tony talks. Tony asked him, "What brings you to Mexico?" Walter replies, "I'm hiding." Then he tells him that he killed a man. Tony asked him, "How did that feel?" Walter pauses, then replies, "It felt good." After his meal, he leaves the cantina. He chuckles to himself about the look on Tony's face. He was lying to him, and hoped that he would just go away. On his way back to his shaft, he stops by an open window. There is a beautiful woman that he secretly admires. He always stops and watches her when leaving. He has no idea that she is spoken for. Then Tony appears again. He tells Walter, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Walter asked him, "Are you following me?" After a brief discussion, Walter walks away. Tony follows him down the street. Walter says, "Quit following me." Tony says, "You said you killed a man." Walter responds, "That's right. And it felt good." Then Tony pops the question. He asked Walter, "Will you kill another man?" Tony says, "Let's get down to business. You will be paid $100,000 to kill this man." Then we see Tony showing him the money. They are in a tunnel so no one can see them. Walter asked, "Who do you want me to kill?" He hands Walter the information on his victim. Walter reluctantly accepts the assignment. He's thinking, "What have I gotten myself into?" Walter has never harmed anyone before. He sneaks into the house. Manuel surprises him. He asks, "Who are you?" Walter tells him he's lost. "This is my first time in Mexico." Manuel tells him to sit down. They both sit and talk while enjoying the fire. Then Manuel surprises Walter. He tells him, "If you were worth the money they paid you, I would have been dead minutes ago." Walter is taken back and looks confused. Manuel tells him, "I am unarmed. Just do what you came for." Then Walter gets his courage and stands up. He points the gun at Manuel's head. He says, "You shouldn't have killed that kid." Manuel tells him he never killed anyone. Walter responds, "What about all those witnesses?" Manuel replies, "They're all liars." Walter tells him to close his eyes. He aims the gun at his head. He says, "Let's get this over with." Then Manuel gets up and walks away. Walter is frustrated because he can't pull the trigger. Manuel asked him, "Do you want to know who killed the boy?" Walter responds, "No, just shut up." Manuel tells him the man who hired you did it. Walter says that's impossible. He loved his son. Manuel tells him that he was killed because he was gay. Then he tells him that they were lovers. His father saw them in a compromising position. He killed his own son and blamed me. Manuel starts making small talk with Walter. Walter becomes relaxed. Then Manuel grabs the handgun. He tells Walter to stand up. Walter responds, "Please don't shoot me. I've never killed anybody before." Manuel tells Walter to turn around. Walter is visibly shaken. He thinks he's going to die. Then he hears a gunshot. He turns around and sees Manuel's body. He had shot himself in the head. Walter runs away from the scene. He goes to the designated meeting location. Tony gets out of the car and calls out for Walter. Walter tells him to throw the bag towards his voice. He tells him after he counts the money they can leave. The case is thrown to Walter. He opens it and makes sure everything is in order. Then he shouts, "Okay, you can go now." Tony and his associates drive away. Walter thinks he's home free. Then he is grabbed from behind. Tony approaches Walter. He asked him why he tried to make it look like a suicide. Walter replies, but it was suicide. Tony tells him that Jose wanted him to be killed. He didn't want him to take his own life. You didn't do what we paid you to do. The boss wants his money back. Walter knows he's about to die. He tries to run away, but Tony shoots him. Then we see a mound of dirt moving up and down. It is Walter crawling out of his shallow grave. A dog runs by him. Next we see him in a hospital bed. A nurse's assistant dances around the room. Walter awakens and tries to get his attention. He asks the nurse's aide for a glass of water. He pours him a glass of water. He puts it in his hand and walks away. Walter is unable to hold it and drops it on the floor. They have a hard time communicating. There is a language barrier. The aide shows him that he was shot. Walter replies, "Then I'm not dead." The aide demonstrates that he was shot in the back. And now he is paralyzed and cannot walk. He lifts his legs and drops them. Walter has no feelings. He is very upset and begins to cry. He lays helplessly in bed. A cockroach is making its way towards him. It makes his way to his head. It walks across Walter's face. He opens his mouth and eats it. He is finally released from the hospital. He decides to return to the scene of the crime. He slowly makes his way back to San Miguel. He is exhausted in the hot Mexican sun. Then he is picked up by some goat ranchers. The road becomes very rough. Walter's wheelchair has no brakes. He is thrown around in the truck. The safety chain is coming loose. Then it finally snaps off. Walter falls out of the truck. The driver is unaware that his passenger is gone. Walter lays on the ground with a couple of goats. Luckily, he is spotted by a good Samaritan. He drives him into town. There is a festival going on. Walter sees Tony across the way. He disguises himself and approaches him. Tony thinks he is an old cripple homeless man. He gives him some money and walks away. Walter looks at the coin. He begins planning his revenge. He goes back to look at his favorite señorita. He watches her for a while, then moves on. Back in his room, he vents his frustration. He swears to get even for what they did to him. The next day, he watches Tony and Jose from afar. Jose leaves and Tony is walking alone. He enters a cantina as Walter watches. It's almost sundown, so Walter waits for him to exit. He breaks a bottle for his weapon. Darkness falls and Tony exits the cantina. Walter is waiting for him. Tony approaches Walter. He reaches into his pocket for some money. He puts the money in Walter's hand. Walter grabs his hand and pulls him to the ground. Tony recognizes Walter and begs for his life. Walter shows no mercy as he kills him. He escapes the murder scene. From the shadows, he watches as they carry Tony's body away. Tony's wife is hysterical. Then we see Walter at a pond. He is covered in blood. He feels that life isn't worth living anymore. He slowly moves his wheelchair into the pond. Then he falls forward to drown himself. It looks like it's all over for Walter. But then we see him in a bed. The mysterious woman of his dreams is there. She asked him if he's feeling better. He replies, "Where am I?" She tells him, "You're in my home." He responds, "I've seen you before, what's your name?" She replies, "My name is Louise." She leaves the room. Walter looks at his wheelchair. He decides to go over to it. When he gets out of bed, he falls flat on his face. Then reality sets in. He is paralyzed.
He explores the house in his wheelchair. He goes to an open door. He can't believe he's inside a mansion. As he is eating, Louise tells him how she saved him. She saw him in the pond and brought him to her home. Later that night, he is roaming the mansion. He sees Louise in bed with a man. The man is Jose, the mob boss. He's the one who ordered him killed. Walter is shocked. He can't believe he's in his home. He looks up at an armed guard and leaves. Back in his room, he ponders over his next move. He decides that Jose must die. He breaks the mirror and makes a weapon. He finds Jose alone in the garden. Jose doesn't recognize Walter. He asks him, "Do I know you?" Then Walter attacks him. He gets him in a chokehold. He holds the weapon to his throat. Jose asks, "Who are you, and what do you want?" Walter tells him who he is. He tells him, "You thought I was dead, didn't you?" He asked Jose, "Does Louise know that you killed your own son?" Jose responds, "No, she will never know." He says, "Please let me live and I will suffer forever." Walter throws him to the ground. He tells him, "You deserve to die." He holds the broken glass to his throat and draws blood. Jose tells him, "If you kill me, my guards will kill you. But if you let me go, I won't seek revenge." They both see Louise walking in the garden. Walter tells him to call her over. He wants him to confess his sins to her. Louise approaches the two of them. Walter tells her that Jose has something to confess. Louise comes closer. Jose tells her that he had killed his own son. Then he confesses that he ordered Walter to be shot. Louise backs off, she is very distraught. Walter tells her she is carrying his second child. He might kill again. He holds the weapon to his throat. He tells Louise, "His life is your choice." Louise tells him to let him go. Walter slowly releases him. Jose rushes over to Louise. They hold each other as he begs for forgiveness. Walter watches them. Then Jose's bodyguards charge in. They aim their guns at Walter. Walter responds, "Please shoot me." Jose tells them not to shoot. They lower their weapons. Then we see Walter alone in the garden. He is trying to get up enough nerve to kill himself. He can't do it. He looks at his wheelchair across the way. The movie ends with Walter on the road again. He stops and looks up the dirt road. Then he decides that he wants to live. And so the movie has a happy ending. If you enjoyed watching this condensed version of La Cucaracha, please click the like and subscribe buttons, plus leave a comment. And thanks for watching.